And welcome to another bonus episode of the Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, strategies, and MTGO grinders for the casual spike. My name is Stan here in Chicago, and with me on the line, all the way from Miami, Florida, it's the one and only M. Hayashi. Matt, how are you?
Yeah, hey Stan, doing good. How about you?
I am doing great. I'm so thrilled we get to chat. I've been a huge fan of your decks for years now. They have led me to a lot of success in Modern especially, and I'm really thrilled that I get to pick your brain about some of your deck building choices, how you approach different strategies within Modern and how you innovate on them, and get in the brain of a really great Magic player and brewer.
Well, that's flat. Well, that's it's so flattering to hear that. But hey, I'm just a guy just trying to have fun with my hobby, so totally. Appreciate that.
Totally. Well, I think one of the best ways to kick off the show in a fun way is a little section that we like to call Inside the Grinder Studio. And what this is 5 lightning round questions that you can provide as little or as much detail as you want in your answers. So it could be a word or a sentence. Just to give us a little insight into what some of your MTG preferences are. So the first question, as part of the Grinder Studio, Matt, what's your favorite Magic the Gathering card?
My favorite single Magic the Gathering card. I only get to pick one, huh?
Only one.
Well, I mean, it's kind of a cliche answer, but I mean, obviously I got a soft spot for Lightning Bolt. But I don't know, though. I mean, I really freaking like Firebolt, too. But the problem is Firebolt's not in my most recent lists. But boy, do I like Firebolt.
What is it about Firebolt that you like, since it's, it feels kind of dinky, right?
Okay, that actually I think might make for a good story. So, okay, when we first started playing, when me and my original group first played Magic, we had no idea about like standard, extended, like all the different formats. We just played like whatever we had, which I think is pretty much the norm. And that was all fine and dandy until one of somebody in our group got their hands on 4 frickin' lightning bolts. And I will never forget when they had they only had 3 red mana. I was at 9 life, and I thought, yeah, I'm winning this. And then bam, triple lightning bolt, and I'm dead. And that just felt like so freaking unfair. So what happened is I was the first guy to figure out the whole format system, because I just felt like there's something wrong here. I'm like, I think that this card, because I was looking at like Shock, and I'm like, why would they print something like Shock? And even to some extent Firebolt, which I also loved, is because I like playing cards like Firebolt, and like the cards I had were more like Firebolt, Shock, like, the ones that were actually in standard at the time, which was like Invasion Odyssey time. And like, obviously this guy was blowing me out of the water with Lightning Bolt, and I just felt like something's off here. Why do they have Lightning Bolt and also Shock? It wasn't really adding up. So that's when I looked online and I actually figured out, there's different types of formats, and so then I got my group to basically play what was then extended, and I guess part of what I just like about Firebolt is I guess it's just one of the most solid burn spells back in that time period. And honestly, I think if you take Lightning Bolt out of the equation, not that that'll ever happen, or not that I want that to happen, heaven forbid, but like if for whatever reason Lightning Bolt got taken out of the equation, probably Firebolt would be right up there, I think. I mean, it's 1 mana for 2 damage that also comes back for 2 more damage later. I think that's at least for like a Slay type strategy, not for like a burn, because right. Burn's not really going to get to 5 all that often, or if it does, oftentimes they've already gained some life or something. And anyway, but for like a Slay type strategy where you just want to be clearing the board and you want some extra reach, I mean, that's golden. You clear the board early on and you even have some like late game reach for 5 mana later in the game. It's really not much more you can ask for.
So when Modern Horizons 1 first came out and was spoiled, were you just ecstatic that Firebolt was getting added into the format, and was it a goal of yours to play it?
Well, ecstatic, yes and no, in the sense that I was hit with an immediate nostalgia bomb, so I will say that much. However, one of my first thoughts was like, oh man, I want to play this card, but like, there's not really like a home for it, at least not yet, because when it was first spoiled, gee, I'm trying to think back. Like when it was first bow, was I already like heading towards like an Obosh type variant like I have now? And of course, before Obosh, like I was playing these Jegantha prowess type decks until I forget, somebody or something somehow. I think somebody suggested Obosh even before I had a YouTube channel. I think somebody in Reddit or something is like, why isn't this guy playing Obosh? And I'm like, oh geez, like why am I not? Yeah. And but yeah, anyway, that's long story short. I don't know 100% sure if this is the case, but I have a feeling that Firebolt may have nudged me ever so slightly towards going a little bit more away from Burn and more towards like red deck wins, Jegantha / Obosh type, you know, prowess / mid-range / you know, whatever you call it nowadays, Dragon Hammer like I call it now. Yeah, just you know, because honestly that's the kind of red deck I used to play back in the day, and yeah, I guess I was just kind of stoked. But honestly, you know, the real reason why I kind of started moving away from Burn and more towards like, you know, you could say red deck wins, whatever, these types of decks I'm playing, you know why?
Tell me why.
It was frickin' Oko, Thief of Crowns. That was like my epiphany moment. Yeah, I remember it was around that time period that I started experimenting with playing a different type of red deck. Actually, the first experiment I made was just playing straight up like Bedlam Reveler traditional type mono red prowess. Because like the thing is, I mean, apparently, like other Burn players figured out ways that they could kind of still stay in the game with Oko. And honestly, like a Roiling Vortex would have been amazing if that would have been printed a little earlier, and maybe I would still be on Burn if they'd had that. Not that I necessarily would want to, because it's funny because sometimes, you know, like what is the saying? Limitation breeds creativity, kind of. Right. Because when Oko was there, gaining 3 life left and right, like demanding like double lightning bolt to deal with, I just felt like. You know, it wasn't necessarily just Oko per se, but for me, when Oko hit the scene, I guess I just had kind of a panic moment where I'm like, geez, if Wizards is going to keep printing ridiculously powerful cards like this that just gain a ton of life as like an afterthought, I'm like, I don't know if Burn is going to be the kind of deck that I can keep sinking in, you know, hours and hours of like, you know, my free time, like getting better at, and it's really going to totally pay dividends. Because, you know, the worst case scenario is you become like a true Burn master, and then like the deck just becomes completely unplayable, and then that's like, you know, you feel like a lot of effort kind of was wasted. It's not completely, because there is obviously some overlapping skills and all that, but just this like existential horror of just Wizards just flooding the format with ridiculously efficient life gain type effects that aren't even like mainly dedicated to life gain. It's just like an afterthought. So that's kind of when I started first experimenting with regular prowess, which some people said regular prowess wasn't really good against Oko. I found out I was doing a lot better with regular prowess against Oko back then.
Yeah, I mean, when I look back on the Oko period, I just remember playing bad cards that I didn't care if they turned into Elk, and that was like one of the only periods when I was on actual Delver in Modern, because then I could do like Deprive, Mystic Sanctuary loops in a Delver shell, and that way, if my 1-drop turned into an Elk, it didn't really hurt.
Yeah, I mean, kind of similar idea. Like the thing that I noticed about Oko was that obviously it punished you like in the sense that as soon as it hit the battlefield, if you're playing regular Burn, you had to like finish the game. You had to finish the game really quickly because I mean, for the most part, burning Oko wasn't where you wanted to be. I mean, if they had exactly 1 Oko in hand, sometimes you could use like 2 lightning bolts or something on it, and you could still find a way to win. But heaven forbid they have another Oko, then you're just done. So like directing 2 bolt effects at Oko was never where you wanted to be. Yeah. You know, and at the same time though, like it just demanded that you end the game very quickly, because obviously if the game goes on, they just have infinite life. So, so my thinking of like, in like, you know, starting to experiment first with like regular prowess was just that, you know, if you think about it, regular prowess doesn't care as much about life gain because it's got all those like prowess creatures and whatnot. And that's, you know, that's the main way it wins anyway, is just crashing through with lots of prowess creatures that get like pumps and stuff. And like so in that way it kind of gets around the life gain, to a large extent. But also like the fact that the creatures have a base power and toughness that's kind of less than 3 means that the +1 for Oko was also not like backbreaking. Some people said that it was pretty bad to get your prowess creatures, turned into elks. I'm like, I mean, it's like, I always felt like it was about the same. I mean,
right.
My creatures usually ended up being like 2 3s or 3 4s anyway, so it's like not that big of a difference. So yeah, I guess I just I don't know, and my playtesting did indicate I was doing a lot better against Oko. Of course, the bigger issue with the Oko decks was, of course, that it's just one frickin' card, and obviously, like in the right shell where they have other cards to take advantage of it, still it could sometimes be a problem.
Right? Weren't they like Urza decks also, so they can like do Oko shenanigans and then Urza out to win the game?
Yeah, that was kind of not fun. Thankfully, Red has super good artifact hate because those Urza tokens, they can still be somewhat of a problem, because if those things get too big, then you have to use like multiple burn spells on them, and that's never going to be. But yeah, but at the end of the day, I did feel I was doing better. The main problem I had with regular mono red prowess, the regular kind of Bedlam Reveler type was I mean, it really just came down to the fact that I felt the deck was way too reliant on Bedlam Reveler, and I don't know that everybody necessarily feels the same way, because obviously there are some matchups where like you just win quickly. That's really what you're going for, like most of the combo matchups and whatnot. But I just found it like in almost every control, mid-range, other aggro type deck, like really the way I won was Bedlam Reveler, which, probably, I'm not going to lie, probably 60 to 70% of the time, not too many complaints about Bedlam Reveler. The problem is twofold. The problem is the first problem is kind of an intrinsic problem, but if it's just an intrinsic problem, I guess sometimes you just have to accept sometimes the things the way they are. I mean, the intrinsic issue is just that, of course, like, you can only play a maximum of 4 of them in your deck. And of course, knowing me, of course, I was playing 4. Sure. And I never really found 4 to be like that much worse. I mean, sure, sometimes I'd have to discard an extra Bedlam Reveler, but it's like, so, how often do you not discard at least one card with Bedlam Reveler? At least with me, even if it was another Bedlam Reveler, usually there was always like one other semi-dead card in my hand or something, usually a land or something that I was discarding. So it's like, it was never that big of a deal for me. But honestly, even 4 kind of felt like, in a way, it wasn't enough, because there was more games than you'd think where I just never drew Bedlam Reveler, and of course, I suppose you have the right to complain, but I mean, at the end of the day, like, for example, your odds of drawing Bedlam Reveler, if you have 4 of them in your deck, are about the same as drawing Aether Vial and Merfolk. And I knew that there was a limit to just how much I could write that off as being unlucky, because there's a lot of games in Merfolk I never see Aether Vial. That's just kind of the way it goes. I mean, like, you're not guaranteed to see even one card as a 4 of, like, in the top like 10, 20 cards in your deck. I mean, sure, 20 is probably getting a little unlucky, but I mean, hey, I've played enough Merfolk where where you're seeing Aether Vial or not, that I know, like, I'm not guaranteed to see it. And so that's the first issue. But I mean, it is what it is. Obviously, for example, I mean, like with like these Obos Prowess decks, I mean, I feel like Seasoned Pyromancer is kind of an analogy there, and that's no knock against Seasoned Pyromancer. It's just the nature of the game. But the second issue, and now we're getting into territory that isn't just kind of the fundamental nature of the game. Like, I hear some people say that Graveyard Hate isn't good against Bedlam Reveler, and I think these people, they're probably see what I mean? I think when you hear that, I think what you're hearing that from is people who probably haven't played Prowess enough to know the difference between people who are not bringing Graveyard Hate in correctly or using it correctly, and people who are. Because like when I was playing against some like Stoneblade decks and whatnot, I don't think they were overdoing it. I think they were bringing in like 2 Rest in Pieces or something, and maybe, I don't know, and other decks had like maybe a few Relic of Progenitus or whatever other types of cards in the mix. I just felt like when they weren't overdoing it and they were bringing in like just a few kind of hate pieces, I just felt like it was kind of nasty, because they just drop, like, for example, they just drop 1 Rest in Peace. They never seem to have like more than 1. So my guess is they only brought in like 2, which of course sometimes if they don't see it, I guess it is what it is. But every time they saw it, it just felt like basically all my Bedlam Revelers were just turned off.
Yes.
So it's like 1 card just shut off Bedlam Reveler for the rest of the game. So that was kind of, and obviously against like Stoneblade type decks, that's very critical. So that was one issue. And I guess a corollary to that is that I really, as you know, I really like Relic of Progenitus, and if you know, and as we all know, most regular prowess decks just don't play it, and for good reason, because you know, obviously it messes with your own graveyard, which is a big no-no with Bedlam Reveler, and that was another problem I had. Like Tormod's Crypt for me was just not doing it, and I know it's like weird that I would think about switching, like you know, fundamentally kind of changing the way a deck works because of a sideboard card, but I mean, realistically, graveyards are just such an integral part of Modern that honestly, it makes really a huge difference the quality of your graveyard hate. If you have better quality graveyard hate, you're actually going to see a lot more wins. I mean, period.
Sure.
And I'm telling you, like, Tormod's Crypt. And I don't know if Soul Guide Lantern maybe had just come out. I actually wasn't aware of Soul Guide Lantern until a little bit later. But
I think Lantern was the set after Ultra. I think
it was what is it called?
The Nyx and the Return to Nyx set.
Yeah, the another return, the Theros Beyond Death, I think, or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, in any case, that you know, not gonna lie, Soul Guide Lantern is pretty good. And I might, and you know, there's a possibility that if I was aware of Soul Guide Lantern, I might have dabbled in regular prowess a little bit longer, because that is definitely very, very high quality, good graveyard hate. But I'm still going to go out on a limb here, and I'm still going to say there's still like there's a bigger difference, I think, still between Soul Guide Lantern and Relic of Progenitus than there is between Soul Guide Lantern and Tormod's Crypt. And I think Soul Guide Lantern is way better than Tormod's Crypt. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reason why Soul Guide Lantern is better than Tormod's Crypt, in my opinion, is very simple. I mean, the fact that you can draw a card with it is really huge, because that means multiples just don't become this awkward nonsense. Right. I mean, one of the biggest problems with Tormod's Crypt is like, I mean, you want to play. I needed to play 4, because obviously, if I'm against Dreads, what am I doing? Like, you know, dirtling with like 3 of these. I don't know if the dirtle is the right word, but you know, what am I doing? Like messing around with just playing 3. If I'm playing against Dredge, I'm have to mulligan to this stuff. And, you know, and obviously, like, Dredge isn't a good example, because obviously with Dredge, like, you know, Tormod's Crypt is probably better than Soul Guide Lantern against Dredge specifically, because when are you ever cycling Soul Guide Lantern? But I'm thinking more like other decks. And honestly, even against other decks, I you know, oftentimes if I'm bringing in graveyard hate, their graveyard is doing something powerful enough that I really want to have access to at least one of these things during a game. And I really want to maximize my chances. So I'm really looking for 4 copies. But like, I mean, just think about, for example, playing against, you know, what's a good example?
Well, I'm thinking about, like, when I think about Soul Guide Lantern and its position in the format, I think it's excellent in like an environment where I have to care about maybe escape cards, because I think that's what it's best at. Yeah, right. The fact that it tags a graveyard card as soon as it comes down, that you can then, like, if you only need to worry about Uro or Kroxa, or just like a single other one of graveyard payoff, then you get to cycle it and practically get a 2-for-1 out of your opponents, since they're exactly counting on getting that graveyard card back. Or, you know, it could do that Tormod's Crypt impression where you get it down, maybe it tags something that is important to them or not, but then you always get to threaten activation.
Hit their whole graveyard. Exactly. Yeah. I think Kroxa and Uro are the perfect examples. I was going to say Tarmogoyf, but of course that's one of the big reasons why I like Relic, of course, because Soul Guide Lantern really doesn't do much against Tarmogoyf. But obviously, you know, like escape being a huge problem is definitely a much less of an issue nowadays. But Uro and Kroxa are good. Excuse me, a good example. Kroxa, of course, is still with us to some extent, but Uro is a very good example, because a card like Uro just to me really demonstrates why like a card like Soul Guide Lantern is just infinitely better than Tormod's Crypt for the most part, because exactly like you just said, you get to nab it, you know, possibly cycle it, but also just that like if you see multiples, it's just not virtual dead cards, you know. Because a lot of times, like you just need to kind of destabilize them a bit, and then kind of try to capitalize and go for the win type of situation. But I mean, like for me, anyway, I know it's just kind of taking a while, but yeah, for me, Relic.
Yeah,
is
so
really...
far, all I've asked you is what's your favorite Magic card?
Oh, you see, I kind of lost track of what the original question was, but we kind of been jiving, right? But anyway,
yeah, no, I love it. You've already won the record for the most detailed answer to the first question to ever be asked in a bonus episode.
Oh yeah, cool.
At this point, I almost feel like it's going to be a disservice to go through all 5 lightning round questions, but I do want to ask, before we get off this tangent altogether, and before we really dive into like the M Hayashi decks as I know them, what's your least favorite Magic card?
Oh yeah, my least favorite Magic card. Well, see, I mean, obviously, like I could pick I could pick something that we all know is a bad card like Chimney Imp or something, but I'm not going to say that because I've never played Chimney Imp. I don't really have any negative feelings associated with it. So I mean, geez, least favorite Magic card. Oh yeah, because I guess another way you could interpret that is like obviously a card that causes frustration and whatnot.
I want to know what causes you the most frustration when you're in a Modern League or any format and someone, plays something against you and you're just like, I should scoop now.
Hot. So no offense. I don't mean this as any offense to any Titan players, but maybe Amulet, maybe not Amulet, maybe Primeval Titan. Mm-hmm. Like Primeval Titan, I have to imagine is a fun card to cast. I don't think I've ever actually cast it. No, actually, I think I've proxied up a Legacy like 12 post deck once or something. But I don't think I've like really played it seriously ever. There's just something I think a little frustrating about a card that basically wins the game, and it's like a 1-card combo, but it also doesn't actually just win the game when it comes down. It just kind of makes the game a hopeless situation.
Right.
And the most frustrating feeling in the world is feeling that like the game is basically lost, but you still have to play on because you feel like a chump playing on, but then you feel like a chump scooping. So it's just like you're in the twilight zone of feeling like a chump.
Is Primeval Titan the reason why your last red deck that I'm aware of had 4 Ensnaring Bridge in the side, even though it's like not a Karn deck that cheats it out but needs to actually draw it?
No, actually, I think Ensnaring Bridge, if it comes in at all, and honestly, I'm still experimenting. I'm still experimenting with Ensnaring Bridge. Like, I do not know all the nooks and crannies yet of where all I'm bringing it in, how many of them I bring in. Because when you're bringing in 4, you're absolutely not bringing all 4 in every single matchup. I'll tell you that right now. I would say where I'm at right now is if it even comes in at all against Amulet Titan, it probably only comes in as a 2 of, I think. And the reason why is that it's really great at stopping an Amulet Titan once it's in play. But the problem is if it's already in play and they drop another Titan, they can just go get Terraria West and then go get EE on 3. And guess what? They also want EE on 3 for Blood Moon. So
right. Yeah.
So then they just wipe both your Blood Moon and your Ensnaring Bridge. And I mean, like, I haven't tried it yet, but I know from experience that like 3 mana hate cards against Amulet Titan is not exactly in the best place because of that, But having I find that 6 moon effects are a pretty good sweet spot for Amulet Titan anyway. Like, honestly, I mean, when I had 8, I mean, I think I was pretty set. But having just 4 Blood Moons and 2 Mages of the Moon, I think that's actually surprisingly. It's better than you might think. I think what's it called? Ragavan is a big part of that also, because being able to cheat that on a turn 2 prevents a lot of nonsense from that deck that we just weren't able to do before,
For sure.
Or prevent, but.
So I'm looking at your latest red trophy. We've got 4 Moon main, and it's a Ragavan and Dragon's Red Channeler deck. And one thing that I've always admired about you is that you have a handful of archetypes, especially red decks, especially red Obosh decks, that you're kind of willing to play anything in just to see how well it works.
Oh, yeah.
So as a baseline, like, what do you think about the latest state of Obosh Red? Do you think it is a Ragavan deck, or could it still potentially be a Prowess deck, and Ragavan is, we're just experimenting
not necessary
at this point?
Oh, for sure. I think the Prowess builds are still viable for sure. And actually, let me just say real quick, that's another reason why I drifted towards more like Giganta / Obosh Prowess type variants as opposed to traditional mono red Prowess, is I really like the customizability. Like the Bedlam Reveler builds kind of force you to maximize instants and sorceries, I love the way I can play like Pyrite Spellbomb, I can play Blood Moon in the main, I can play like all these cards that aren't instants or sorceries, and they don't necessarily mess with that. But I do think that Prowess is still viable. See, the only thing though is that for me, turn 2 Blood Moon is still a little too good to pass up. Yeah. Honestly, if it wasn't for turn 2 Blood Moon, I don't think Ragavan would necessarily be mandatory. I don't like using the term mandatory anyway, because I'm sure plenty of players can find a lot of success. But I will say, as long as Amulet Titan is in the format, as long as all of these janky kind of, maybe janky is not the right word, but as long as all of these kind of off the beat weird combo decks that we're seeing like still like new ones popping up all the time, which thankfully almost all of them are like 2 or 3 colors and are, you know, have some color intensity to them. But
Right.
since there's like all these like cascade type decks, all these different types of combo decks, which incidentally happen to be at least a little soft to Blood Moon, having access to turn 2 Blood Moon for me, like I just couldn't imagine going out there in the format without right now, because honestly, that's been a big, I don't know how many games against like matchups that otherwise would be unwinnable I would have been able to win if I wasn't able to stick a turn 2 Blood Moon. And then in the sideboard, of course, you have Pillage too. I mean, just like juking them with Blood Moon, as I say, is just a big source of wins, especially on turn 2. On turn 2, Blood Moon can you'd be surprised how many decks Blood Moon can juke if you're getting it out on turn 2, you know?
So I'm a occasional Ponza player, and I have drank the Blood Moon Kool-Aid. I almost want to ask, like, why don't you play more Ponza, considering how much you appreciate Blood Moon effects, especially on turn 2?
You know, I've been kind of interested in maybe trying Ponza. I mean, of course, you know, one answer you could give, I suppose, is that it's a 2-color deck, and I'm not necessarily known for playing 2-color decks, but I've played 2-color decks before. I mean, you know, I've dabbled in different splashes for Merfolk, and I even played Red-White Prowess for a while, although if you go back to those old Red-White Prowess lists, you'll notice that I almost always keep the white to like almost the bare minimum. But that being said, I'm certainly not. I'll certainly play a 2-color deck if it's powerful enough and if it's fun enough for me to play and all of that. But I guess there's like a couple reasons. I mean, one thing is that like I just don't have infinite time, believe it or not, as much content as I put out. I mean, already like I actually am spending a lot of time on Magic. If in addition to like the 5 decks I play now, if I play like another deck like Ponza, it's kind of like, where does that rabbit hole end, right? Because you know, there's a little bit of like an OCD-ness kind of about me that honestly, if I played Ponza, I'd probably end up trying to make like a 2-color deck of each different type of color combination, and at that point, like I'm way too deep down the rabbit hole in a way. So there's part of that, you know. But I have nothing against Ponza actually. I would say that I do kind of like, I definitely am inclined on a theoretical level to, you know, and of course maybe there's some ego involved here too. I mean, I'm kind of inclined on a theoretical level to think that these Obosh variants probably have at least some, you know, not insignificant advantage, but, at the same time, I do actually recognize that these Ponza decks are actually conceptually very similar at this point, especially now that we're not really playing many prowess creatures. It almost feels like a mirror match now whenever I play Ponza, because but Ponza decks are all over the place too. I've seen some play Ragavan themselves. I don't think that's the norm, but yeah, they're all over the place. Like I never know what I'm going to face against them. Maybe they feel the same way against me, because I mean, obviously I'm always like, yeah, that's the thing. Like there are some versions of Ponza that are maybe only like green lands and a few other cards that are kind of off, and otherwise like there's a lot of similar cards being played now. So yeah, I don't know what else to say other than that they're very, very similar decks, and they're probably about the same. Yeah, unfortunately I don't think I can say that much more because I haven't necessarily played Ponza. All I can say is that it is actually very, very similar to this deck now.
What is it about the monocolor decks that capture your imagination?
I think part of it is honestly just my desire to kind of see how far I can push things. Mm-hmm. Like my thinking is always more, I won't try to splash a color unless I think it's necessary. For whatever reason, I think a lot of Magic players start with like multiple colors for a deck in their mind, and they'll almost try to like just throw another color in there. Like they'll try to like shoehorn another color in there in a way, which I have nothing against that other than just for whatever reason, maybe my thinking has always been a little more, I start with one color, and if for whatever reason one color just I just feel like I really need access to another color, then I start thinking about maybe I'll splash another one. And believe it or not, one of the advantages of Modern, you know, Modern. See, Modern has 2 things going for it. Everybody knows that Modern has better mana. So on the one hand, you could look at it like, why are you not playing another color? Because Modern has some of the best mana, second only to Legacy, basically out there. Mm-hmm. It's easier to splash another color in Modern than almost anywhere else. But another way to look at it, though, and I don't think a lot of people are looking at this the way I do, but you see, another advantage Modern has is since it has such a large card pool, you get access to a lot of interesting a lot of interesting cards within one color that can do things that, like in standard, red has no business doing. I mean, obviously, like Blast Zone was in standard for a decent amount of time, but obviously, think about Blast Zone, for example. I don't know if modern standard has anything close to something as flexible as that we can just throw in the main deck, even.
Sure.
So, like, when you have access to cards like that, Blast Zone, Ratchet Bomb, whatever it may be, I just find that I don't necessarily need to be splashing other colors as much, and I actually find that being monocolor, it has some advantages that I think are oftentimes underappreciated. I mean, obviously taking less damage is a big one, but also just like, for example, and I think this deck is a big one, the fact that I will never ever color screw myself off of another color. And I know Ponza will almost never happen, but trust me, I play Merfolk, and actually if there's ever a deck that can actually color screw Ponza off its green, it's Merfolk. But believe me, the number of games I've won against Ponza where they stick a Blood Moon and I Spreading Seas all their remaining forests,
right?
Like it comes up, and that will never happen to me with this deck. So just saying.
I love it. I also have to ask, and I feel like I probably should have asked this already, and I'm going to get angry emails if I don't bring this up. But what's the deal with Hammer of Bogarden? I can tell you love this card. You keep adding it to your red decks. Is it just one of your new favorite pet cards, or do you think there's something here that people are not paying close enough attention to?
Okay, well, first of all, shout out to Dylan Cruz. I forget the name of his Magic channel on YouTube, but I think he's got his name will pop up, I think, if you search him. But so first of all, shout out to him, because while I'd love to take credit that like I totally thought this up, and it definitely seems like a very M. Hayashi card. It was definitely him who suggested it, but I do actually think Hammer of Bogarden has a lot going for it. And it might seem a little weird because I know that it seems janky as all heck. And okay, and forgive me because I'm gonna go on a slight tangent. I promise to keep it brief. But the reason why I'm on Hammer of Bogarden is because originally another user actually named Frederick LeMay suggested that I try Igneous Inspiration from Strixhaven, with the lesson cards. That was a new card, so obviously nobody's really tested it much before. So like Hammer of Bogarden has a certain stigma in that it's existed for a long time. So the immediate thought is like, well, why hasn't anybody been playing it by now if it's good, right? Well, obviously Igneous Inspiration didn't have that. So I was all over trying that as soon as he suggested it. I'm like, well, I got to try this out. And see the interest, and I'm going to cut this short. I'm just going to say at the end of the day, Igneous Inspiration, it didn't ultimately work out. But what I did discover was actually a 3 mana, 3 damage to creature or player sorcery speed was actually pretty good. And when I say that, obviously I know that like, if that's all you get, that's pretty bad. But I'm just saying like that as a baseline, because obviously in Inspiration's case, you get to either draw a card and discard a card, or you get to get a lesson card from your sideboard, right? So it's not just that. You know what I mean? What I found out was actually just that baseline plus you get something else. Like I was killing Stormwing entities. I was killing I don't know, prowess creatures that like Shocks wouldn't. I was I don't know what else to say other than just that it surprised the heck out of me that the 3 mana wasn't as big of a problem. I thought if there was going to be a problem with Inspiration, it was going to be 3 mana. It wasn't. One of the biggest reason with that card is that it just mangles your sideboard. That's the problem. I mean, if you could have like 10 like lesson cards that are just like a separate sideboard, then honestly I might still be on Inspiration because I'm not going to get too much into it. But that card actually was pretty good. It just couldn't justify just it completely eating up all my sideboard. But that's actually when Dylan Cruz suggested Hammer of Bogarden, when I was kind of like expressing my thoughts on Inspiration and where I was at. And he's like, well, how about Hammer of Bogarden? And then I'm like, for real? Actually, I think I think this is kind of un-Hem Hayashi like. I think I may have been even a little dismissive at first, where I'm like, oh geez, I love that card, but I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't draw you a card. It doesn't. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, gee, how much different is this from Igneous Inspiration? I mean, like obviously the advantage of Inspiration is that like if you get say, oh I don't know, the summoning spirit summoning or whatever it's called, elemental summoning. Sure. Yeah, the one that gives you a 3/2. That's probably one of the more basic ones that you fetch. I mean, if you think about it, like it's more mana efficient than Hammer of Bogarden in that you pay 3 mana, you deal with something, and then you get that spirit card. But on the other hand, it is just a 3/2 spirit. It's relatively easy to deal with, and it is card advantage, but it's also like it doesn't necessarily have it's a little more mana efficient, but it's also not necessarily incredibly game altering. And when I just thought about like Hammer Bogarden, like as compared to that, I just thought to myself, well, I don't get necessarily the access to immediate card advantage the same way, but I do have the ability to, get like a lot of late game card advantage again and again. And I just thought to myself, like, really, if when I was looking back to my time experimenting with Igneous Inspiration, I just thought to myself, if at the end of the day, if the baseline stat is good, 3 mana, 3 damage, creature or player, even if it's a sorcery, I just thought, like, if this secondary ability is even somewhat good, there might be something here. So I did actually give it a shot. And, I don't think I necessarily completely was sold on it at first, but the more and more I played with it, I just noticed I really liked being able to deal with all these 3 toughness creatures that are in the format. I really liked, the baseline was still good, but here's the thing about Hammer Bogarden that I think a lot of people are missing. Sure, against a lot of like aggressive decks, I don't know, decks that combo decks where like you have to win quickly, you're not really going to ever see the, you're never going to see the recursion. So, and for whatever reason, I think when I see a lot of players play it online, it just seems like they're not running into necessarily a lot of control or a lot of like the grindier types of mid-range decks out there. Mm-hmm. That's where it really shines, particularly against control. Actually, I mean, mid-range sometimes, sometimes you'll just get them before it gets that late, or they'll get you. But it's really against.
So are
control,
you saying like this is good against these Murktide decks, for instance, or whatever's running like actual counterspell these days?
Yeah, see, Murktide is I'd say it's probably like it's probably good, but it's not. You're still going to mostly be seeing it for its baseline of 3 mana for 3 damage. It's you'll see maybe see the recursion come up maybe 10% of the game, maybe 20%. Mm-hmm. It's not really. It's not, honestly, it's mostly against control that you see the recursion come up maybe like 50% or more of the time. Against Murktide, here's another thing too. It is actually kind of in a way skill intensive. Like there is a certain finesse in being able to correctly use Hammer Bogarden, because especially in this deck where you have the ability to like flashback the Pyromancer tokens and play Fury. I mean, there's like a lot of stuff you can do, or play Obosh. There's a lot of stuff you can do with 5 mana, but just being able to correctly evaluate where sometimes you're like, geez, like if they stick a Dragon Rage Channeler next turn, I'm going to be in big trouble. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of times I'm like, well, I got my hammer in here, I'll just return it to my hand, right? And you'd be surprised how many times, bam, next turn they drop like a Dragon Rage Channeler, right. And it's like that's where hammer shines. But of course, that that's why I say maybe like 10 or 20% of the time it comes up or so, because a lot of times against Murktide, you do have other things to do with your mana for the most part. But it's really with against control that you really see Hammer, its recursion really being a game changer. I don't know what else to say other than that. I mean, I guess you can look at some of my content, which I'm hopefully going to have more with Hammer coming up, more games against control, maybe where I show it off. But for whatever reason, maybe because they use Force of Negation against Blood Moon oftentimes early, so like usually they have more Force of Negation targets than necessarily just Hammer Bogarden. But a lot of times, at least one of these things squeaks through, and they don't exile with Force of Negation. And then at that point, I mean, like I can just keep returning it to my hand. And I mean, like obviously, if they drop a Planeswalker, you have to just get that off the table, so you're not wasting mana returning it to your hand. But the fact that you can use this to kind of pepper at their life total, and then you've just got extra burn in your hand a lot of times when they do drop a Planeswalker, it can also help finish it off there. I mean, it's something that you kind of just have to see in action, other than just that a lot of games against control, they kind of stall out. And when they stall out, you just keep hammering at them, and and you'd be surprised. Like, yeah, sometimes they can't. They only have so many cryptic commands and whatnot. And believe it or not, I've hammered quite a few control players to death, even without like Ensnaring Bridge. And then Ensnaring Bridge is the other thing that helps out a lot. There's a decent amount of decks, like Shadow is a good example, where Shadow plus Hammer is a really, really good alternate kind of win condition that you'd be surprised how often comes up. Yeah. Anyway,
for sure. So you mentioned Merfolk as another deck you play. I know you've also been a champion of like mono black decks, especially vampire adjacent mono black decks. And then you wrote here that you have some experience with like White Stoneblade Death and Taxes strategies along with Infect. How often do you cycle between these decks? Do you usually focus in on one like for a given period of time after a format has shaken up, or do you try to touch on like all of these after new sets or whatever as you get new ideas, just to keep abreast of like what's changing in some of your favorite strategies and how you can continue to elevate them?
I usually like trying all of them, if even in a new meta. I mean, theory crafting only takes you so far. Certainly, like in like combo heavy metas, you can kind of intuit that Merfolk is probably going to be better positioned than it is in like mid range removal heavy type formats. But that being said, you still never know for sure, and it's never ceased to amaze me certain formats where some decks have been more dominant than others. Like I'm trying to remember back to like there was a time when Merfolk was particularly, you know what it was? It was the Oko era. Actually, Merfolk was actually killing it for me back in the Oko era, if I remember correctly. And I mean, it is something that if you look back at it, you can understand why. It's because like Merfolk doesn't necessarily care if they gain life. It also doesn't necessarily care that much if its creatures gets Elks because their baseline isn't necessarily that much more powerful. It has access to a lot of counters. But I mean, there's a lot of like theoretically, if you look back at it, you can obviously theory craft why Merfolk would be pretty good against Oko. But at the time, none of us necessarily knew this. So like one of my instincts was that maybe it wouldn't be that great because a lot of times the Oko decks happen to also be packing, a decent amount of other removal. So I thought maybe that would be a problem. But long story short, I to answer your question, I do like to try each one of these decks in a new format. If I can, because obviously I only have so much time. So like, for example, my, right now my mono black deck has been a little bit neglected, and that has nothing to do with the performance. It's just, I literally don't have time to be playing all these decks all the time. So
For sure.
and for whatever reason, just mono black has been a little neglected lately, but I do try all of them to get a feel for, where they're at. And then obviously the one that's doing the best, which a lot of times lately is going to be the red one. I kind of start running with that,
Do you find that you gravitate to specific types of play styles or strategies, or is it a matter of seeing what you can do within all 5 monocolored tents and kind of taking it from there?
I definitely gravitate towards a certain kind of play style. I think definitely if you look at like my Merfolk decks, I don't play them like straight aggro. I mean, the same way I don't play mono red necessarily like straight go for face. I don't play a Merfolk like straight aggro. Yeah. I actually play somebody joked that I played Merfolk like a Delver deck, but I think that's really spot on. It's kind of like I stick Merfolk and then I try to like control the board with counter magic, removal, whatever, chalice sometimes, and I don't know, for whatever reason that's just worked out for me more. I guess part of it is also that like I feel like going more pure aggro, it has its places, but I feel like that can make you a little more glass cannon like, because like there are some matches you'll just steamroll, but then there's other matches you have like no chance against. And I just find that if you make it a little more controlling / mid-range type, it gives you a better ability to kind of leverage your format knowledge and whatnot to be able to kind of finesse out some wins that you might not be able to get otherwise. And, it gives you a little bit of extra game against like everything. Maybe there's a reason, for example, why Reed Duke is in love with Jund, because that Jund has that quality in spades, Yeah. And I think you can see that in the other decks too. All of them are definitely kind of mid-rangey, like, and a little bit more on the grindy controlling kind of side, except for Infect. Because obviously, Infect by its very nature kind of has to be a little more of a glass cannon type deck. But even there, the fact that I play Sylvan Scrying as a way to have access to like a virtual 8 kind of Inkmoth Nexuses, I think that, I have like a little toolbox thing I can do with that too. That doesn't necessarily make me more mid-rangey, but it does give me access to a little more finesse, maybe I'd like to think. So I don't know. I guess. Yeah. I think you can see some of my philosophy, and obviously the playing all 4-ofs, you can see that in all my decks, basically. So,
I can relate. That's how I start. Any deck that I put together, I always start with just like 24 lands and then 4 of everything else, and then start kind of making adjustments based on the curve or what I think might be good in multiples or worse in multiples. So I love your 4 of approach to deck building.
I don't recommend playing 4 of everything for like every single type of cards. If you'll notice with my decks, I play very certain types of cards, and basically any type of card I play is basically going to be good as a 4 of, at least I'd like to think, including, yes, Hammer Bogarden, because, like I said, against the control deck, sometimes you need more if they force a negation one. Sometimes you just don't see any, and sometimes against like decks that go really grindy, you need lots of them. But anyway, neither here nor there, other than just that, for the most part, if I'm playing a card in my deck, it's basically good as a 4 of, because I have played some cards in the past, like for example, that 5-mana Chandra, like Chandra Pyromaster or something. That card's just not good as a 4 of. So like I was kind of thinking about cutting it down to like a 2 of, but just with me, a lot of times if I'm cutting it down, a lot of times I just cut it all together. I don't know what else to say.
Sure. Do you think that just makes deck building a little easier, or is it really about card evaluation and your, maybe having an approach of why play a card if it's not going to be good as a 4 of?
Oh yeah. So I think both. Yeah. So first of all, definitely hit the nail on the head. For the most part, I really do think that the better cards are usually by their very nature just better in 4 ofs. Because think about it, like Fury, for example. Fury is so flexible. It's an excellent early game removal spell that can give you card advantage even when you're pitching it. Late in the game, it can give you insane card advantage, and it's also just effectively 6 power creature for 5 mana. Mm-hmm. Fury is just an inherently really good card that, I did intuit from the beginning it was probably going to be okay, but then it obviously took me a little while to fully implement it. But yeah, and I'll use Fury as an example. For example, to Chandra Pyromaster, because actually one of the reasons I went back on Fury, from what I recall, is that I was actually experimenting with these other 5 mana like Haymaker type cards. One of them was Chandra Pyromaster, which actually, let me tell you, when that thing gets going, that thing just crushes. It's like, let me just look it up. It's like, I think it's
from the core set, right?
Chandra Heart of Fire. That's it. Excuse me. Chandra Heart of Fire. Yeah, it's a 5 mana, for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. Yeah. +1, discard your hand, exile the top 3 cards of your library. Yeah. Deal 2 damage to any target +1. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you can see, like, if you stick this thing and you can defend it, this thing just runs away with the game.
No doubt.
Yeah. The issue I had with it, though, is that obviously as a 4 of, it's just too clunky if you draw multiple of them. You can't play them early. Oftentimes, like, if you draw like multiple of these and you're not able to set up a good early game, then you just put yourself in a situation where they can keep kind of picking these off if you're playing them and they don't have any defense. And of course, you could snipe stuff off for 2 mana, but I think the main issue is just that it's 5 mana and it takes a while to come online. Believe it or not, I actually really preferred what is it called? Burgi / Hornfell.
Right. Like the combo card, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. Believe it. So my thought process there, before I started, I think, and actually part of this was also getting back to Hammerbogarn, but also part of this was I think, my thought process with Fury too, eventually. But yeah, like the Hornfell, Burgi card, I think is a good example of why cards that you can play as a 4 of a lot of times are just better, because think about it, no matter how many copies of Chandra you play, at the end of the day, you might draw this before you're ready to, before like it's going to be good. Sometimes mm-hmm. you're going to draw it and it's going to be a 5 mana card that just rots in your hand and does nothing. Even if you have 1 in your deck, I know like the odds of that happening are less, but at the end of the day, that's a problem that Burgi and Hornfell just don't have. I actually found that, believe it or not, Burgi and Hornfell compared very favorably to Chandra Heart of Fire, because Hornfell is really not that far off from what Chandra Heart of Fire does, if you think about it. I mean, and I'll tell you, when I resolved Hornfell, a lot of times I just ran away with the game. I mean, the difference between playing 2 cards off of the top of my library and 3, and the difference between having to pitch a card, which oftentimes wasn't even that necessary, I don't know what to say other than that. A lot of times Chandra compared to Hornfell is kind of a win more card in a way. Like at the end of the day, Hornfell is a super powerful like Haymaker type 5 mana card, and Burgi is a pretty respectable 3 mana 3/3 creature type card. Now, obviously, I'm not still on it, so like I do think I have better options, but I'm only giving this example to explain why I think a lot of times cards that you can play as a 4 of are just kind of better by their very nature. I do think that Burgi and Hornfell are just kind of better cards than Chandra Heart of Fire. And I think it comes down to the fact that they have that flexibility that they can be either Burgi or Hornfell. And Hornfell is like not that far off from Chandra in the first place in a way. You know what I mean?
I feel that.
And that's also, by the way, a reason why I like Hammerbogarden, because like Hammerbogarden in a way is kind of a split card in that it's the 3 mana 3 damage, but it's also that recursion engine late game. Like you could play a card that just has an insane late game, but is a dead card if you draw it too early, or you could play Hammerbogarden, which can actually do stuff early in the game and can give you an insane late game. At least that's the way I see it.
This might be one of the last topics we get to talk about, but I'm curious on your read on Modern as a format right now, like especially after the impact of Modern Horizons 2, which I'm assuming we would agree was a pretty big shakeup. I think a lot of people are enjoying the cards from MH2. I know I am, and I still have PTSD from Hogak a little bit, and I definitely remember like how the original Modern Horizons just kind of absolutely destroyed Faithless Looting and made it way too strong for the format after being such a beloved card for so long. Are you happy with the direction that Modern's going? Do you think it's a healthy format right now?
That's an interesting question. I have kind of mixed feelings because Modern Horizons 2, man, in some ways, Modern Horizons 2 is one of the best design sets in a long time, and in some ways, it's the worst design set in a long time. I have such mixed feelings. I think I summarized it when somebody asked me this on Twitter, and I think I said something like, yeah, man, see, I have mixed feelings because on the one hand, they printed so many busted cards, but I said on the other hand, it's like every single archetype, including the stuff I play, got some kind of busted card. Mm-hmm. So it's like the cards are incredibly high powered, but they did print all of them and honestly, I got to commend Wizards. They did print a pretty good smorgasbord of kind of these very powerful cards across lots of different colors and different archetypes. Honestly, I think they pushed it a little bit. It's looking like they actually threaded the needle here, though. I mean, I was watching and immediately, immediately some type of food deck just completely breaks the format after this. Sure. But so far, it's kind of looking like they threaded the needle, and I don't know. I will say one thing I don't like is I don't like them printing all these insanely powerful mythics that force me to have to keep buying this stuff, like Ragavan, for example. I love Ragavan, but I resent the fact that I had to pay more money than I would like to admit to get these things, No
doubt. Yeah, I feel that. Don't you think it's a generally good thing if all the strategies are getting new busted cards, though, and it's more of a rising tide, lifting all boats situation, as opposed to like just blue getting counterspell and subtlety, for instance, and like it being the obvious best strategy moving forward?
If the Magic economy wasn't really an issue, I would completely 100% agree. Like if sort of like, and I'm not going to lie, I knock on wood, I'm in a situation where my life right now where at least unless Magic gets like insanely expensive or something, I think I'm going to be okay supporting this hobby. It's not going to break the bank or anything. But that being said, especially for newer players, and even to some extent me, I mean, like I said, having to drop like hundreds of dollars on new cards that come out is still kind of like not nice. But like if definitely the card economy was not a factor, for sure, I would completely agree that that just printing lots of new cards that kind of like shake up the format, that give like different archetypes something to experiment. I mean, that is kind of where Magic's at. I love that, actually. And so that's where I have mixed feelings about Modern Horizons 2, because actually if it wasn't for the effect that this has had on like the card economy, it's a really good set. I think it's really made the game a heck of a lot more interesting, actually. It's just that cards like Ragavan, to a lesser extent, I guess other rares, mythics and whatnot, I'm a little concerned because I don't want this game to turn into like a pay for play type of thing, a pay to play type of thing. Yeah. Like I said, knock on wood, I think for me that may not necessarily be that big of an issue if things go well and whatnot. But this is not really I want Magic to be a game for everybody, and it just Modern Horizons 2 has a lot of expensive cards that I think are really not conducive to that. So I don't know what else to say other than
Well, don't you think that's a modern thing, though? Because I do agree with you that I want Magic to be a game for everyone. And one thing that I appreciate about, Magic design in general is that whatever your budget, you can find an outlet. Like whether it's Pauper or Limited or Standard or even like playing for free on Arena. Like I feel like if you want to play Magic and you only have so much budget, you can find a way to actually cast spells and play lands. And then Modern is more of a more exclusive, perhaps, experience for people who may have a little bit extra disposable income or a more expensive Mana Traders rental account.
I agree. I just think that I think we can all agree probably though that I think modern sort of play like a modern's like economy situation, like the cards kind of a lot of expensive cards being dumped into the format and the sort of barrier to entry, I think has spiked a lot. Like it's been spiking a lot. Like I completely agree. It's fine to have different sort of tiers or different types of formats that have different types of budget constraints. But like my fear is, I mean, because the thing is, all of us have our limit. Like, and so like, I mean, there's a point where even I get pushed out of the game, and that's a little concerning to me. Is I want Wizards to be a little careful with how much they push. Because the thing is, whenever you push a bunch of new playable cards in the format, and a good chunk of those are rares and mythics, it's going to tax people. This is like another tax on our lives in a way. You know what I mean? We go about our daily business, we do grocery shopping, whatever, but then we also have this additional Magic tax on our lives because we love this hobby. You know, at a certain point, if the Magic tax becomes too much, like even you and me are probably going to get taxed out of it, right? But like, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But that's my concern. Is I think like too big spikes. If it spikes too big, too hard, too fast, that could be a problem, you know?
I totally feel that. But apart from the economy, though, do you think fun and gameplay wise, Modern is in a fun, good, healthy place? Like, or do you think there's anything that's on the edges that might be a little bit too pushed or a little bit too efficient that people should keep an eye out for that, maybe isn't getting exploited as much as it could be, but poses the risk of maybe getting broken and even maybe needing a ban?
I mean, my initial instinct was that Urza Saga might be a problem, but it's kind of looking like maybe that might be held in check. I mean, it just so happens that most colors do have something like Spreading Seas, Blood Moon, Artifact or enchantment removal. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Like, honestly, I'm going to say this much. I think if Urza Saga threads the needle, I think most of the cards probably will. I'm a little bit miffed at to a little extent at like Crashing Footfalls in a way, which obviously was an old card, but I mean, I guess like, you know what it is? I don't like the way frickin' Starless Agent is both an artifact and a creature. Like that's the only thing that frustrates me, because that means Deafening Silence and Aethersworn Canoness both can't fully cover your bases.
Right.
But you know, it's okay. It's okay. I mean, the deck is, I can manage the deck and everybody else can. I think it's basically fine. There are some cards that I like. I wish they would have redesigned Shardless Agent so it was an artifact creature. I would have been fine if it was just like a 2/2 creature, but whatever. That's neither here nor there.
It's funny you should mention that, because I've been playing Footfalls a bit. I always forget that Shardless is an artifact creature. At least in that deck, I feel like it's never really relevant to the combo at least. But then once you're like maybe have a Tarmogoyf in play, you're facing down a Tarmogoyf. Suddenly it's like, oh great, I helped grow the Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? It's at the end of the day, I think, like I said, I think my take is if Urza Saga threads the needle, I think probably I can't imagine Ragavan getting banned. Maybe that's just a little bit of my bias though, because I love that card in Mono Red Obosh. But
mm-hmm.
I just feel like a card that literally dies to all removal and doesn't actually win you the game on turn 2. Everybody knows like a bad luck a bad luck situation where like they've got like a Thoughtseize or something that they got off the top of their opponent's library. Most of the time that doesn't happen though.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie, actually, Ragavan's pushing it. That card is really freaking good, and obviously it's been a source of a lot of my wins. I don't think that's going to get banned though. It's just, I mean, that's like if you think about it, it's kind of like a 1-mana Tarmogoyf, right? Like, I mean, if the Tarmogoyf's been allowed to survive this long, right? I mean, I don't know, right? It's just a really powerful 1-drop. The way Tarmogoyf's just a really, really powerful 2-drop. I don't know. Like,
what about Channeler? Like, I feel like we've kind of reached that stage post MH2 where people are starting to recognize that maybe the more push problematic card is Channeler, just because like it's good as a 1/1 in filtering your hand. It's insane as a 3/3 flyer for 1 mana. I know you're playing it in your red deck win, like
presently. Yeah. I've kind of I've grown to like the card a lot, man. It's always in my deck in particular, it's a little tough to like know exactly what to cut. Right now I'm cutting Bonecrusher Giant for it. But man, that card is actually, I'm going to say that card is probably better against a larger, it's better in a larger amount of decks, I think, because like I said, the main reason why I think Ragavan is so good in our deck is because of Turn 2 Blood Moon. That's like the main thing.
I see.
That gives you access to a level of free wins that didn't really have before. If you're not necessarily playing a card like Blood Moon or another card that you really benefit a lot from ramping into by turn 3, I would actually say, yeah, Dragon Rage Channel is probably going to be the better card of the two. Like if we just didn't have access to Blood Moon, probably, yeah, Dragon Rage Channel would probably be better than Ragavan. But It's still kind of close though, because also Ragavan in our particular deck doesn't necessarily get turned on as fast as it does in other decks. But for sure though, Dragon Rage Channeler. But you see, this is one of the reasons why I'm not necessarily that concerned about Ragavan getting banned, because it's kind of like there's so many powerful cards they dumped into the format. And let's also be honest, like Monastery Swiftspear and Soulscar Mage are also kind of stupidly powerful cards. I mean, let's
totally
right. I mean, where does the banning end, right? Like that's the only issue. I do think Dragon Rage Channeler though, like that surveil ability, that for me, that's one of the main things that's hyper powerful. Every time I put a card into my graveyard with that thing, it feels like I drew a card, and this is crazy.
Yeah. Fun. So many fun cards to talk about with you. Anything we didn't touch on that you want to bring up, either about these decks, Modern, or Magic in general?
Yeah, I mean, not that I can necessarily think of. Definitely, it's been nice. It's been nice chatting. I think I think Magic's in a pretty good place for the most part. Like I said, I just hope that I hope the Wizards continues to thread the needle in not overdoing it with super powerful cards, or at least giving them to most of the other archetypes, and hopefully the card economy doesn't end up becoming like a pay to play type thing. And I think that Wizards, there's actually still room to grow, actually, which is a crazy thought. Totally. We'll see,
Yeah. Matt, where can people find you online and keep up with the decks that you're building, iterating on, or even watch videos of you play these decks?
Oh yeah. So first you can find me on Twitter. I'm at mhayashi, or I guess actually Twitter gave me M Hayash for whatever reason. It cut off the I at MHAYASH 557-80121. There's probably there's probably a bazillion M Hayashis in Japan. So
I'll include a link to your Twitter account in the show notes so that people don't have to memorize that number to find you on there.
Yeah, thanks. And of course, you can also find me on YouTube. I have two Magic channels. I have two channels on YouTube. I'm still kind of figuring out this whole YouTube thing. But my main Magic channel is Magic Matt on YouTube. But honestly, if you just search M Hayashi, you're gonna get a lot of stuff from both my Magic Matt and my M Hayashi channel. Mm-hmm. But yeah, my YouTube channel is Magic Matt. And then my second channel on YouTube is M Hayashi Gaming. I post.
What's the difference between the two channels?
So right now I'm posting all my Red Deck wins and Merfolk content on my main channel, and also like my format updates or other things, which I haven't necessarily done that in a little bit, but we'll see. But like if I have some kind of like I don't know, format kind of commentary or something like that, that usually goes on Magic Matt. Mm-hmm. Magic Matt is kind of my main Magic channel in that sense, because I mean definitely my Red Deck wins and Merfolk decks are my main decks. M Hayashi Gaming is kind of where I put the white, black, and the green decks, and also where I just play where I put some other games, because I do play other games from time to time. Like lately, I got the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, so my love for a Final Fight is being rekindled. So you can see some of my Final Fight escapades on there too, if you're interested. But yeah, that's basically I'll
definitely check those out, and we'll have links to all three of your YouTube and Twitter accounts in the show notes. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Love picking the brain of Magic players whose decks I actually have gotten to play. And like I said, I've won with some of your mono red decks. They hold a near and dear place to my heart. I reached a point eventually where I'd rather have played a M Hayashi red deck than Izzet Prowess. Even though like Izzet Prowess was arguably the best deck in the format for a while before Modern Horizons 2, and I had all the cards and I thought it was going to be a great stand deck, and then just never really scratched that itch. But your red decks, maybe because they have Blood Moon in them, always did. Oh, yeah. So appreciate your time, appreciate your brain, and I think that you are a positive force for the modern community, especially.
Well, my pleasure. I really appreciate that. It's been a blast too. Thank you so much for having me here. And I guess it's been great.
Right on. If you out there listening haven't yet, make sure you follow M Hayashi on Twitter and YouTube. Also, if this is your first time hearing this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out every week. If you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. And if you'd like to submit a question to the Dive Down, or just reach out in general, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word, or email thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon over at patreon.com/thedivedown. Matt, do you have a Patreon or any way that people can support your play and content?
Oh yeah, well thanks for asking. Yeah, I actually do. So I'm m.hayashi on Patreon, and if you want to see access, if you want to have early access to the content that I got coming up, that's kind of the main thing I'm offering there right now. But yeah, definitely it's appreciated. Thanks a lot.
Of course, yeah. We'll have that link in show notes too. Shout out to Mana Traders for sponsoring the Dive Down. Sign up for a Mana Traders account using promo code The Dive Down 2021, all one word. Get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, play more Red Dead!